Hello, welcome back to Scherable. I'm your host, Bill Scher, with another special In My Mother's Basement edition post-election. The last one were my pre-election predictions, which, let's remember, were for entertainment purposes only. And I tried to be as transparent about what I thought was known and what I thought was my own gut. Try to separate those things out, give you a sense of what I was thinking and where I'm coming to my conclusions. And I had the secondary set of the more pessimistic predictions, which I did not embrace as my own, but pointed out that if I was being more sober, less optimistic, where one might come out. First and foremost, the only thing that I said without any hesitation and caveat was that Biden would win, and that it does appear that is going to be the case, even though things are not final yet. And everything after that, was a mix of interpretation of available data and gut sense. And obviously, what's important in this world is not whether I am right or wrong about things, but what can we learn from the experience? How much better do we understand how elections work, and how much do we understand the American electorate? And one thing that I had put out there was that either Florida, North Carolina, or Georgia would be called before midnight. And I said that because, one, those states were expected to count early. And even though the polling there was only slightly in Biden's favor, my thinking was that with enough of a national headwind, with the national polling being pretty robust, it was not crazy for at least one of them, most likely Florida in this analysis, would tip, because Florida was only a 1.2 margin of victory for Trump 4 years ago. North Carolina, they have a popular Democratic governor. The Senate race looked pretty good. And Georgia is a state that has just been trending demographically in the Democrats' direction. And it might have come to pass. It is possible still that Biden will win Georgia, because there's still a lot of Atlanta area vote out there. And that Fulton County count was slowed because of a burst pipe in the election office. So I am personally annoyed that prediction might well have come true if the vote actually came out in Biden's favor and that pipe didn't break. But we are where we are. More importantly, the underlying rationale for that opinion was wrong, because there wasn't a uniform blue headwind across the country. There's a map that the Times is tracking that shows what direction, blue or red, the election has gone in since 2016, and it's all crisscrossed. It's not blue all the way through, which is not what we were getting from poll data beforehand. Poll data was suggesting, Biden's going to lose West Virginia, but not by as much. Biden's going to lose Missouri, but not by as much. So that's what I was using to think we'd have this more general shift in Biden's favor. Where now it seems clearer that Florida is going off in its own more rightward direction, which does track with the 2018 midterm results. Whereas Georgia, Biden win or lose, that is a closer race than Georgia was 4 years ago. There still is a bluing trend in Georgia, regardless of the final count. And if you might recall a previous Scherable, I did talk about South Carolina. Back in the summer, I was telling folks, don't throw your money at South Carolina. That's never going to happen. There's closer races out there. I then got I then drank a little bit of the Kool-Aid from the more recent South Carolina polling, showing it in dead heat, saying, "Okay, I was wrong. Worth putting some money in there and seeing what will happen, even if it's a long shot." And then even on the last set of predictions, talking with the Senate more generally now, my basic sense was right in that I argued I don't think we're going to get a lot of ticket splitting that's going to get these Democratic Senate candidates in the red states over the top. It seems like these are pretty nationalized races, and so I was skeptical, and I wasn't putting in the blue column South Carolina, Kansas, Texas, Alaska. I made the Georgia races. I thought were going to go to runoffs, which they well might, at least one will. I made an exception for Montana, thinking that Steve Bullock had a track record winning statewide. And there was some recent polling where it was a 1-point race, even though there are conflicting data out there. And where I ended up being overly bullish was North Carolina and Iowa, which is more excusable for North Carolina because Cunningham led all the way in polling. And there was some mild tightening, but he was still up by about 3 in the final polls. And I was being a little more gutsy with Iowa, even though there was conflicting data at the end. The famed Seltzer poll was showing a solid Republican win, which a lot of folks dumped on at the time because it was out of line with so much other data out there, but now proves to be pretty spot on. I was a little taken in by my observation from 2018 that Dems won the House popular vote back then, suggesting a bluer shift was underway. Now it looks like Dems are losing at least one, I think 1 or 2 of the House races there, as well as losing the Senate race and the presidential race in the state. So my point is that the one point I had, which was that we're not going to see a lot of ticket splitting, that was true. But I just didn't extend it properly to Iowa and North Carolina, although North Carolina is a little unsure at this point. There's still a bunch of vote to be counted there. It looks very uphill for both Biden and Cunningham, but we can't quite call it yet. And Maine is sort of in that same boat. Maine might be another one where I would be wrong, where Gideon was leading all the way through. And even though there was some tightening at the end, it seemed like ranked choice voting would still save the day for her. And it could. There's still vote out there. And if that race narrows some, I think Collins is below 50 last I checked. If that narrows a bit more, ranked choice voting could come through and let Gideon eke that out. So little unsure there. The bigger miss, and obviously it's hardly just me on this, is Trump's general overperformance relative to the polling, especially in Wisconsin and Michigan, and probably Pennsylvania. We don't know the final results in Pennsylvania yet, but Biden was up about a little under 5 in 538, and it was less in Real Clear Politics. I think it was like 2.8 in Real Clear Politics. So maybe that's going to be the better average when it comes to Pennsylvania. And we don't have final numbers yet in Arizona. It's possible Biden overperformed polls in Arizona. And the polling in Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, that's all pretty close. I mean, Florida, Trump, I think Trump's winning by 4. So that's a bit more off, because I think Biden was leading by 1 or 2, depending on your average. And North Carolina was around the same. And if that becomes a loss by about 1 or 2, off, but not crazy off. And Georgia might actually be quite spot on, depending where it finally shakes out. But it's really those Wisconsin and Michigan numbers, which are just glaringly bad. And, one of my big observations before the election was that we're not seeing the same kind of big Trump momentum nationally or in state polling that we did in 2016. That's particularly the case in Michigan. 2016, that went from a 10-point or so lead for Hillary down to 3.6 in the last 2 weeks. That's very, very rapid. So even though Michigan's final averages weren't on the mark, you could reasonably say, hey, I see where this train is going. And Wisconsin was stable, but they stopped polling in the last week. So if there was a late surge, you weren't going to detect it. Now both states were polled very regularly. Obviously, a lot of attention to those states. And Biden's average was, I think depending on which average you were looking at, but well over 5 in both. Memory serves. I know it was around 8 in the 538 average. So that's a pretty big miss for Biden to win those states by a hair. And what is the reasoning for that? That's not something that I can put out there with any kind of certainty at this, hangover moment of the race. But to the extent that I'm wrong, a whole bunch of people are wrong there, and it does shake your faith in the whole industry. It shakes your faith in the ability for pollsters to do what we expect pollsters to do. I was having a little discussion with Matt Lewis about this offline outside of DMZ today, and I feel like probabilistic forecasting has they're trying very hard. The forecasts say, look, these are not certainty, these are probabilities. If it's a 10% chance of winning, it's still 10%. 1 out of 10 things happen. They do all that kind of stuff, but that percentage number gives a much greater level of it gives the impression of certainty so much more than the poll number does. When it used to just be this says 51-48 with a margin of error of plus or minus 4. People sort of readily said, okay, with plus or minus 4, it could be this or it could be that. And everyone would say, remember, these are snapshots in time. They're not predictions of the final number. Things can always change. We were doing a better job, I think, of girding ourselves for errors like that than we are now with these probabilistic percentages. So I'm disinclined to just trash everything that pollsters have to say, but those misses in Wisconsin and Michigan are just too glaring to ignore. And is it shy Trump? Is it that we had mail voting and that was hard to model? Is that the pandemic screwed things up? I just don't have fantastic answers here. The one thing you do have to conclude, regardless of polling, just the mere fact that Trump, even with the apparent loss, was holding his own in a sense in certain places. He didn't collapse in the Rust Belt. He only barely won those states the first time, and he now looks like he will barely lose them this time. And he clearly improved in Florida, even if he was weaker in some other places. We see Trump improvements scattered across the country, and Biden improvements over Hillary scattered across the country. So it just says to me that part of what went into my thinking was if Trump was going to have an overperformance, there'd have to be something going on in the news, some kind of success, some kind of actual turning of the corner to give him that boost, and to have a third pandemic spike going into the last week, seemed to be in the opposite direction. And on the New York Times Daily podcast, they talked to a couple of Wisconsin candidates, one incumbent Republican's assembly race, and their reactions to how to handle the pandemic, how they were so divergent. And the Republican was a bar owner, and one of his employees got coronavirus. She got her husband sick with coronavirus. The husband died. And the Republican candidate, incumbent bar owner, still didn't get himself tested, didn't change how we went about doing things. So we have to learn to live with this stuff. Our polarization is and has, not been resolved by the pandemic. People are still interpreting things through their own lenses. And part of my gut reaction here is, again, and this, I'm sure this will require much more analysis before saying anything certain about it. Trump's sort of cocky way of approaching it, his cocky, non-scienced way, has appeal to a certain class of voter, and that allowed him to not, go through the floor, despite being in the middle of one of the worst health crises that our country's ever been in. And that's a hard thing to get your head around if you're coming from the opposite side of the spectrum on these questions. But on the positive side here, let's, I saw AJ Delgado, who was a Republican who's kind of turned on Trump, was kind of like, hey, Democrats, get over it. You won. Why are you sulking? There are positives here. There is, Biden won the majority of the popular vote. That margin will get bigger as more and more vote comes in. There was a breakthrough in Arizona and possibly Georgia as well. So some of that Sun Belt demographic changing is happening, just slowly, and not extending to Florida. Not happening with Texas nearly where as fast as people would like it to be. And the House stays Democrat. Some seats were lost, and I would assume, I haven't seen the numbers yet, but with Democrats winning the most seats, and not through gerrymandering, I would assume Democrats won the House popular vote as well. So it's still a more Democratic country than not. And with Biden, Democrats figured out how to build a demographically diverse coalition to make the Electoral College work in their favor. And even though it may be that Democrats only net 2 Senate seats, depending what happens in some of these outstanding states, it was pretty heavily Republican Senate map. Democrats were fighting on very, very uphill turf for that. And it comes with the harsh reality that Biden will likely have to deal with a majority leader McConnell, which makes policymaking extraordinarily difficult, not to mention the confirmation of any judges. So we obviously can't be sanguine about that reality. But as far as the popularity of Democratic ideas and the potential durability of a Democratic coalition, there's still some positive signs there. The challenge is now how to build on it in a challenging legislative environment. And, the one possible silver lining there is people's expectations of what can be accomplished in Congress have gotten a lot lower. It's not going to be, hey, Biden, solve the economy, solve the climate, solve immigration, solve guns, you have the numbers, do everything, nuke the Senate, whatever you have to do. All those expectations are out the window. And now it's a question of, are there some basic things that can be done just to keep the country afloat? And whatever Biden can wrest out of McConnell might be very much lauded. Now, of course, it's possible you can't wrest anything out of McConnell, and that's a whole other scenario. Just looking at the chat here, any insight into the inevitable litigation to come, how long that might conceivably push things out? I don't think Trump has a leg to stand on in terms of stopping the count now. You can't stop the initial count. North Carolina, Supreme Court already said that the late arriving ballots, if they're properly postmarked, can be counted. I would be surprised if Pennsylvania got reversed. That the allowing of those late ballots to be counted, through not having a stay. If the court backtracked on that, I know Gorsuch, Thomas Alito want to backtrack on that. They would need to get more than just Barrett. They would need to get Kavanaugh to come along. I'm not convinced that would happen, but you never know. I can't totally count that out. But again, Pennsylvania is not the do or die state here. Looks like, assuming Biden has Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Pennsylvania can go red, and and Biden would still win. Wisconsin's not an issue there because they already said Wisconsin can't count their late arriving ballots. And it doesn't seem like Michigan or Wisconsin are close enough that a recount would could flip them. That's where I think the litigation, that's Bush v. Gore. The litigation is in the recount process of what ballots get kept, what ballots get tossed. And that only really becomes a big deal when you're, in the hundreds of a margin, not the several thousands. So we still need to see some final numbers in these places, but I don't think litigation is going to be what saves the day for Trump. Last question here. How many more voters voted for Trump in 2016? I don't, we have to wait a bit for final numbers, because there is a lot of, mail voting and late counting that's going to go on, not just in the swing states, but in the blue and red states, particularly the blue states. So we want some hard numbers for making those kind of 2016 comparisons. And surely there will be more for Trump than Trump 16, and there'll also be more for Biden than Hillary 2016. So we had more voters in general, because mail balloting, early voting made it so much easier to vote. And the Democratic assumption has been, if you make it easier to vote, that's going to automatically help Democrats. Not totally so. Convenience is convenience for everybody. And Republicans might turn up their noses at mail voting, but they didn't turn up their noses at early in-person voting. So some of that is just the basic convenience of it all. And beyond that, as I was saying before, I think that people's reaction to the pandemic varied depending on your experience and perspective and biases. So there are folks who were attracted to Trump because of how he handled it, and folks who were repulsed by Trump because of how he reacted to it. So that's my initial sense of things, obviously. And there's also, of course, that Cuban factor in Miami-Dade, which I think is specific there. And that seems to be, antipathy to socialism, and a bit surprising to me, the belief that Biden is somehow aligned with socialists. And obviously, Biden tried very hard to disassociate himself from Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders when the subject came up. But Republicans did a halfway decent job of saying, hey, they're on these task forces together. They're going to work hand in hand. Biden's a shell of a man. He'll be pushed around by these people. I think it's very, very faulty and obvious and disingenuous political analysis, but I think it was bought by some people in certain pockets of the country. It doesn't seem like the Cuban vote, determined the outcome of Florida. It was one piece of their puzzle. And to the extent that that's a problem for Democrats going forward, having a Republican Senate means that Biden's going to listen a whole lot less to the socialist wing of his party. So perhaps that won't be as big of a deal going forward. I'll leave it at there for now. Been yapping for a bit. Thank you for your patience and your understanding. I'm sure we'll be doing another one of these real soon with the way things are going these days. If you like this, please click subscribe on the YouTube channel. If you want to support it financially, please go to patreon.com/BillShare. Back with another Scherable real soon. Take care.